Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you and welcome to the Performing Arts Series brought to you by the Kennedy Center and the Prince William Network. I'm Billy Taylor. The piece you just heard was a piece called Work Song. It's by a wonderful trumpet player, a cornet player, a composer, whose name was Nat Adderley. It's one of those songs from the jazz songbook that we like to play because it gives you a kind of swinging feeling. It gives you an idea of what jazz is all about. It was originally written for brass instruments, but as you can see, today we don't have a brass instrument. We have a violin. I'd like to introduce to you the members of the group. First, the trio, and we're going to start with our bassist, whose name is I've only known him for like a zillion years. You would think I just met him. This is Chip Jackson. Our drummer, that's embarrassing. Our drummer is Winard Harper. This gentleman is also someone I've known for a very long time. His name is John Blake Jr. Now today, we're going to focus on the place of the violin in jazz. The violin was one of the first instruments to be used in jazz, and along with the banjo, it was one of the most popular and portable instruments used in early jazz players. The sound of the violin is very close to the sound of the human voice. So much of the music which was sung in the early days was also played on the violin, because you could get the same kind of feeling. You could demonstrate the kinds of things that you were trying to say musically. So with the help of John Blake, we're going to show you how the violin is used today. Now, John, as you may notice, has a violin which looks a little different. You can kind of see through it, like that. Now, that's because it's an electronic instrument. Would you tell us a little about that?
Yes. This has a volume knob on it, and also has some electronic devices in it where a cord plugs into those devices, and then it goes directly from here into the amplifier, which amplifies the sound. Now, of course, I have my acoustic violin as well, but I don't use a pickup or I just use maybe a microphone.
Before you pick up the acoustic, would you play something on this without turning the volume up?
Okay.
I can't hear that. I can't hear that.
And I'm working hard, too.
No, turn it up. Okay, all right. So that's one of the reasons that in the early days, before we had this kind of amplification, you couldn't use the violins with the horns and
That's
the drums.
right. That's right. Now we can be as loud as anybody in the band.
Well, let's try the acoustic for the moment. Now, is this acoustic instrument a special one that you acquired somewhere?
Yes, actually, some maker in Philadelphia named Harold Golden who makes violins, and this is one of his fiddles I've been using.
Now, what's the difference between a fiddle and a violin?
Just name.
Just the name.
I think a lot of times in country music, more folk music, they refer to it as a fiddle, but it's
the same instrument.
It's the same instrument.
I
yeah.
see. Well, you've worked with some of the greatest stars in jazz, and one of them in particular, McCoy Tyner, has written a lot of things in a very energetic style. He plays the piano and writes music in a very energetic style.
Yes.
And you do that on a violin.
Well, this is what I'm going to play is one of his pieces, actually.
Well, before you do,
okay.
I'd like to have you do a spiritual.
Okay.
And because I was talking about how the sound of the violin sounds like the human voice. And so, to me, when I hear you play this, I think of somebody in a choir or a soloist or someone singing. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child or something like that.
Okay, I'll play that one.
That's beautiful. It's no wonder they call those songs sorrow songs because they really are very meaningful and very quiet. Now, I was talking about you working with McCoy Tyner, one of the great jazz pianist composers, and McCoy plays music that came from the spiritual, but it's much more energetic and it's much more of today. What do you do of his?
This is a composition by McCoy called Passion Dance. I kind of adapted it for violin.
I see. Passion Dance. You know, jazz has gone all around the world. It's traveled in many places, and everywhere it's gone, people have sent the music back to us with little things of their own attached to it. And a good example of that is when jazz went to South America, to Brazil, people heard the kind of music that we were playing here in the northern hemisphere of America and said, gee, that would work very well with our samba. We'll slow the samba down and we'll make it a little different. We'll call it the bossa nova. And they did. And one of the things that we like to do, that's become such a part of jazz, that we can actually play a song that is from the American songbook, and it'll sound like one of the bossa nova pieces that they used to play and still play in South America. This is Here's That Rainy Day, a tune by Jimmy Van Heusen and Johnny Burke, and we'd like to give you a bossa nova version of the song. It sounds like this. Thank you. Here's that rainy day. You know, jazz has many different voices. Jazz is a way of expressing yourself, and each voice is different. When I play the piano, it sounds one way. When John plays the violin, it sounds differently. When Winard plays the drums, it sounds in a very special way when he plays it. When Chip plays the bass, it has a very special quality that only he puts there. So jazz is a very personal way of saying things. Now, you heard the sound of the smaller violin. I'm going to get Chip to play on the bass. You know, this is, as you can see, it's the same shape, but it's a much lower sound because it's a bigger instrument. And the sound has more room to sort of move around in. So I'm going to get Chip to play a spiritual also. This is a spiritual that I wrote called Spiritual. Thank you. Now, as you can hear, that's a very lovely sound. What we're going to do is put both violins together. We're going to have John and Chip play a song written by Thelonious Monk, a great jazz composer who plays the piano. And both violins are going to play a piece written by Thelonious Monk called Blue Monk. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's the blues, and you can see that blues is the other side of the spiritual. As a matter of fact, in the early days, the only difference between the blues and the spiritual was the words. I mean, it was you sang some certain words on Monday through Saturday, and on Sunday you sang other words, and that was kind of the focus of the spirituals in those days. We're going to focus on John Blake for just a moment. John, have you always played the violin? What was your first instrument?
Piano was my first instrument.
Really?
Matter of fact, in my house, my mother was a pianist. It was 5 of us. Everybody took piano lessons.
Everybody took piano
Everybody.
lessons,
You
Well-
had to take lessons if you lived in my home.
How old were you in those days when you
About
started?
7 when I started on
About
piano.
7?
Yeah.
Since everybody played the piano, how did you get to the violin?
Well, believe it or not, I used to watch the Lawrence Welk show.
The what?
The Lawrence Welk show. And it was a show that had dancing, and I didn't really watch it for the dancing because I wasn't really into polkas. But they featured a violinist on the show, and once a week, and I would hear him and just love the way he played. And then also, there was another show called The Ed Sullivan Show, and often they had guest appearances of people who played violin. I think Isaac Stern made an appearance on there. So hearing those musicians play really inspired me, and I had an opportunity eventually when I got in the 3rd grade. The teacher said, this man has come to give violin lessons. Who's interested? And I raised my hand. That's how I got started.
Now, you went to school in Philadelphia?
I went to public school in Philadelphia. That's where I got started on violin. Then I was advised, somebody saw that I had a little talent, so they told me to go to the school to focus more on music, the Settlement Music School, which is one of the oldest community music schools in the country.
Those are wonderful schools. I mean, they take anybody from the neighborhood and even from other neighborhoods
That's right.
and sort of put them into a musical environment where they can really learn.
Great program.
Yeah. Well, since you began to play the violin and began to do all of these kinds of things, you studied European classical music and so forth, but you've traveled a lot and you have added other things. I was telling the audience about things that are added to jazz when we send jazz around the world. When it comes back to us, we get something different. Now, something came from India that you heard about.
Yeah, I had never actually been to India, but what happened was a friend of mine came to one of my concerts years ago, and I was improvising. I was in my early stages of improvisation, and she said that she had a teacher that was teaching her European Western music, but also that sometimes when she came to this lesson, he would be sitting on the floor playing the violin in between his legs. So I said, I'd like to meet him. And when I first heard him, he sounded like he was doing something like this. And I said, man, that guy needs to take some lessons from me. But what happened was, as I listened to him, I began to appreciate the music that he was playing, which was from India. And they have a very fascinating culture in the way that the violin is used in there.
Were these ragas that he was
These were
playing?
ragas, you know, or a scale in their culture, yeah.
Now, what did you learn from that?
Well, for one thing, you heard me play the spiritual. You heard me bending the notes and sliding. Well, in Indian culture, they've really mastered that technique. And so after studying Indian music, when I went back to playing the blues, man, I started really bending the notes. So I really learned a lot. It's interesting how you learn something from a different culture that somehow relates
To what you're
It's
doing.
connected to some
Connected to what you're doing,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, I'm going to have you connect with Winard Harper on drums and have you do a conversation between the drums and the violin. In a sense, something somewhat like they do in India, but certainly this is more from a jazz point of view.
Okay, all right.
Well, that was, we'll have to call that conversation between John and Winard. I mean,
Okay.
since you're co-composers on that.
Right.
The other people that began to influence you once you began to play jazz were many, but who were some of the early violinists?
Well, you know, it's funny. I studied classical music from 8 years old up
Right.
to through college, and it was only until my second year of college that I even realized or heard that the violin could be used in the jazz idiom. I never even thought about it before. And what happened was a graduate student played a recording of Ray Nance. And of course, Ray Nance played with the great Duke Ellington, and that blew my mind. I haven't really recovered from that yet.
Well, he was very special. He played wonderful trumpet, but he had the same lyricism and the same kind of feeling that he used on trumpet on the violin, which was a little more rhythmic than perhaps some violinists who didn't play the trumpet
Right.
were using. However, there was one violinist who didn't play the trumpet that was perhaps the most rhythmic player I know, and that was Stuff Smith.
Stuff Smith, amazing. Whenever I want to be reminded about how to swing, I go back and listen to one of his recordings because he really could swing. He swung so hard.
Yeah, he was wonderful. I had the opportunity to work with him, and I also worked with a man named Eddie South. Did you ever hear of Eddie?
Well, he was just a monster. I mean, had he lived in this time, he probably could have easily been a soloist with an orchestra as a classical violinist playing European music.
Mm-hmm.
But he was equally as adept in playing jazz, and great. He would incorporate both classical and jazz together in a lot of his improvisation, which you well know.
Well, one of the things that I learned when I was working with him was that he liked to take the Paganini violin pieces and play them in the jazz style. And I actually arranged one for him. We're going to play a little excerpt from it. It's one of the many things that Paganini wrote.
Right. It's the 24th Caprice. I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I learned an awful lot from him. One of the things that I learned from Eddie South was to use some of the things that I had learned studying European classical music on piano from Bach. And instead of trying to sound like Bach when he wrote his two-part and three-part inventions, I began to play it in a jazz style like this. I'm going to take the harmonic structure of a Jerome Kern piece called All the Things You Are. Thank you. Now, what I'd like for you to do is Bach wrote music for unaccompanied violin and cello and so forth, so maybe you could play the melody to the piece that I was improvising upon, and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
All the things you are. You know, after the next piece, what we're going to do is take some questions from the audience. And if you are watching us, we'll take your questions too. So you can call us on 800-578-1396. That's 800-578-1396. We mentioned the fact that the violin can sound like the human voice. And you talked about the fact that someone like Eddie South or Ray Nance could really make that happen. Ray Nance in particular with Ellington and Come Sunday really sounded so much like the human voice that sometimes Ellington substituted it for the singer and said, well, we won't use the lyrics, we'll just use the violin. Did you ever have any experience playing in the Ray Nance context?
I had the privilege, really, for a short while of working under Mercer.
Yeah, Mercy
Elvin
Ellington, yeah.
when he had the band, and he featured me on some of the numbers that Duke had wrote for Ray Nance. It was a great, great honor. I really loved that. That was a real joy to do that.
Good. Well, this is one of them. This is Come Sunday. Thank you. Thank you very much. Come Sunday is the title of that. We have a call from Virginia Beach in Virginia, so go ahead, caller.
Yes, my question is, Gene Ponte, the way he plays, it sounds almost like a synthesizer, and I was wondering, how does he make his violin sound like that?
I didn't quite understand you. We have a bad connection. Can you repeat your question?
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
A little better now.
Okay, Gene Ponte, I was curious to know, how does he make his violin sound the way it does? It sounds almost like a synthesizer.
How do you make the violin sound the way it sounds? Sounds like a synthesizer to the caller.
It does?
It's on.
It sounds like a synthesizer. Well, I wasn't trying to make it sound like a synthesizer, but
No, I'm talking.
Maybe that has to do with the electronic.
It might have to do with the electronics that makes it sound more like a synthesizer. I'm actually trying to make my violin sound closer to a voice than a synthesizer. But did you like it?
I think the call is off
Oh,
by
okay.
now, but I hope she did. The next, there's one right here in the auditorium. What's your question, please? What's your name?
My name's Tashina Gorgoni, and I was wondering if Mr. Blake, could you please demonstrate what it's like to play the violin as a fiddle?
Okay. I'll do my best.
All right. Country fiddler. All we need is a caller now. We have a call from Cobleskill, New York. My goodness. Go ahead.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Jeff. I'm a classically trained violinist for about 14 years now, and I just want to know the best route to take for jazz and improvisation.
How do you improvise on the violin?
Well, the first thing I would tell you to do, it's really important to listen. If you can start collecting, if you can remember some of the names of the people that we talked about today, like Eddie South, Stuff Smith, it's just good to maybe just listen for a while. And the other thing, I do have a book that's out for improvisation for string players. If you probably log in on the website here, they can get in touch with me and I can give you more information about how to get that.
Thank you very much. Yes, your name?
Veronica Jackson.
Could you speak into the mic, please?
Veronica Jackson. Can a cello or a viola be used as a jazz instrument?
Can a cello or viola be used as a jazz instrument?
Yes, indeed. And there are several cellists. There's a cellist named Akua Dixon Toure, Eileen Folsom. There's several string quartets you might want to listen to that feature the cello. One is the Uptown String Quartet, the Turtle Island String Quartet.
Yes, they've been here. The Turtle Island String Quartet has been here.
And Quartet Indigo. So if you can go to wherever the record store is in your area that sells jazz, you might be able to find some CDs under those names.
We have a call from New Jersey. Go ahead, caller.
Yes. Have you ever been influenced by the almost rock and roll sort of feel of like Jean-Luc Ponty or Eddie Sugarcane Harris?
Well, certainly I've listened to all that music, and I actually played for quite a number of years with the great Grover Washington Jr. and his band, which was more fusion and more crossover. So I'm definitely comfortable in that style as well. So yes, I am familiar with that, and I enjoy playing my violin in different genres as well, in different styles.
Yes, sir. Your name?
My name is Kevin Cottums. Historically, there's always been a bridge that kind of bridged the gap between the past and the present as far as in the arts arena. How do you think that bridge is being remodeled or reconstructed in today's society as we move away to like live music and more synthesized music and computer-produced music?
Well, one of the things that happens in today's society is that people are beginning to dance to and to relate to live music in a totally different way, even live music that's synthesized. I mean, in concerts, you find people who are using electronic keyboards and electronic basses, electronic guitars, and so forth. So you have a lot of electronics going on, and it really they're being used in the same way that acoustic instruments are being used. So I see coming together of the hip-hop generation and some of the things that are going on in contemporary society, so that many friends of mine have recorded with rappers and also done things that are very much geared to younger audiences, so that the music is music that they're familiar with. Thank you. We have a call from Brooklyn, New York. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, my name is Charles Stay. This is to the bass player. I thoroughly enjoyed watching and listening to him, and I was wondering, what was your thoughts about the playing of George Duvivier?
Well, George Duvivier was, he played in the studios, in the New York studios, and played with so many different people, from Frank Sinatra to everybody, all the jazz musicians. So I would go to hear him in the clubs a lot, and he influenced a lot of players in that he was very well-rounded. He was classically trained, so he played the instrument impeccably, properly. Could have played in the New York Symphony. And he was so well-rounded, he could play with anybody in any style. So that's his influence.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nicole Myers, and I was just wondering, if you want to be a jazz musician, do you have to study classical music first?
You don't have to, but it certainly helps. And one of the, I think most musicians that I run into have studied in one way or another European classical music, because there are things that you can apply to whatever instrument you play. But what about you on that subject?
Well, I'm really glad I had classical training, because the training that I got helped me at least to know the instrument. So when I went to play jazz, I had a reference point because I knew the instrument. So there's a lot of things when I listened, I could figure out how to do them because I had studied. So I kind of recommend it for students to get their technique so they get familiar with the instrument. And then once you do that, it gives you more time to experiment, and you kind of know your way around.
You actually have worked with some of the people in the Suzuki method. What do you do with that?
Well, a lot of times, still among string players, improvising is a new thing. Just the other day, before coming to Washington, I had a workshop with some young players who had not been really studying that long, but they were already improvising, starting to get an idea of how to use rhythm, how to rearrange notes in different order, and to get them to begin to think, because there's a thinking process that goes on when you improvise. You're actually composing on the spot without music in front of you.
Like you and Winard were doing a while ago.
Like Winard and I were doing, right.
Well, thank you. We have a call from Compton Plains, New Jersey. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, how you doing?
Fine.
I'm an amateur pianist from New Jersey, and I was wondering if you guys could suggest any artists I could listen to get a better feel for the music if I wanted to try to practice some of it on my own.
Well, as John Blake was saying earlier, by listening to other pianists, you can get some very good ideas of some things that are being done. For instance, there's a wide variety of styles. You could listen to McCoy Tyner and get one thing, Oscar Peterson get something else, Bill Evans and hear something else. And that's only 3 of the many styles of piano that are out there for you to listen to. But the idea is to internalize those things in the way that we have tried to do. Each one of us on the stage here has a personal style, so you would not mistake Winard Harper for another drummer. You would not mistake John Blake for another violinist, nor would you mistake Chip Jackson for another bassist, and I hope you would not mistake me for any of the people that I just named. So the idea is to listen and to internalize the things that you hear so that you can use them in your own way. We have a call from Wilmington, Delaware. Go ahead, caller.
Okay, my question is for Mr. Blake. 2 questions, really. The name of that violinist that you played earlier, Eddie something. I missed the last name.
The violinist?
Yeah.
Eddie South.
South, S-O-U-T-H?
Right. Oh, yeah, like South.
Okay. The other thing, Mr. Blake, has to do with playing the acoustic versus the electric and how you decide which one you're going to use and when, because there's a certain feel, I'm sure, and a sound to each instrument.
Well, I like recording with my acoustic violin because it's under conditions where I can get it mic'd properly, and in the studio conditions you can really have a lot more control. In a live setting, sometimes it's a little more difficult to control the acoustic instrument. So that's why primarily in live situations I use my electric, because I have more control over the volume and I can have a lot more presence.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have someone here, but if we can take a quick question, and then we'll go to the wine thing subject. What's your question?
Hi, my name is Raymond. I was wondering, was it difficult to learn jazz after studying classical music?
No, it was very easy. That helped quite a lot. And I think I speak for all of us, but I see that we are out of time, and I'm sorry I didn't have more time to answer your question, but I'd like for you to give special thanks to my trio for being here. Chip Jackson's on bass. Winard Harper on drums. And we'd like to especially have you have a real big round of applause to our special guest, John Blake, for sharing his musical thoughts. Thank you. Thanks for your thoughts on jazz, and it's been my pleasure to share with you America's classical music jazz. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't get a chance to ask questions today, then you can contact all of us by using the email address on the screen. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to answer your questions. If you'd like more information, we invite you to visit the Kennedy Center and the Prince William Network websites at the addresses on your screen. There, you'll find resources on using the arts in your classroom and information on upcoming programs. We'd also like your comments and suggestions about the Kennedy Center Performing Arts Series. We've provided an electronic form on the Prince William Network website, and there you can select topics and resources that you need to enhance your classroom experience. I'd like to have you remember that our next live performance will be Tuesday, February 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, that's when the Tambuco Percussion Ensemble of Mexico will perform and demonstrate their unique style and discuss their rich musical culture and traditions, and that's something you don't want to miss. I'd like to thank the students right here in the auditorium for being with us, and you've been a special audience, and we'd like to thank you very much. Special thanks also to the viewing audience from across the country. Thanks for those questions, and thanks for tuning in to the program. We're going to conclude with something that sort of wraps up all of the things we've been talking about and trying to demonstrate for you. This is Night in Tunisia coming up, and it was written by Dizzy Gillespie. You'll hear a little of the Latin kind of jazz. You'll hear a little of the blues. All of the things that we've talked about so far, we're going to try to put a little of that into Dizzy Gillespie's Night in Tunisia.
Thank you.